Guys, today we are going to be talking about recurring versus non-recurring businesses. So it is my advice that any business that you start needs to be thought of with a recurring nature in mind. It's so important. Why? Because any business that's not recurring in nature is going to fizzle out eventually. The market's going to move on, and it's going to move on from them. Now, every business could potentially be recurring in some way. I don't want to say every business, but every business could have a recurring nature to it. All that recurring really means is that customers come back, customers repeat. So no matter what business you're in, whether you're in, let's say like the clothing business, where you sell clothing, you could be in the construction business, you could be in the real estate business, you could be in, some sort of service business. Every single business, could have some sort of recurring, nature to it, and it's just about capturing that as much as possible. So number one, let's break down each of these businesses, in terms of the different types of businesses, and then let's go into specifically, how to create a strategy that actually allows you to get recurring revenue from it. Okay, so I'd say we can categorize all businesses into three different categories, right? So one is a product, one is a service, and we'll say number three is like tech, software, we'll put e-learning and all that kind of stuff in that kind of tech bucket. I know a lot of people like to think of technology as a product, and obviously, there's the whole software as a service, sexy buzz term. But for the purposes of this conversation, let's kind of separate the three. Okay, so we'll start with products. So products tend to be a little bit less recurring in nature. Why? It's because, you sell the product. Let's say I sell pillows. Someone comes and they buy pillows, and essentially, that's really it. That transaction's done. It's possible they come back, to my online store or my physical store to buy pillows. It's very likely that they will if they're good quality pillows, but it's not necessarily recurring in nature. However, there's a lot of things you can do even in that kind of business, a product business, and every product business is different. Like there's businesses like, let's say a printer, for example, where they're going to try to sell you as much ink as possible, right? That's a highly recurring business. The pillow example, maybe a little less recurring business, because how often do you go and do you buy a pillow? So you always have to turn whatever business you're in into some sort of recurring business. So even if you're in the most like non-recurring product business, try to make it so that your customers are at least referring other people, or they have some incentive to come back within a period of time. Maybe within like 3 or 4 months, if they make another purchase, they get a deal. Or everyone they refer on their next purchase, they get like 20% off or 30% off, whatever it is, right? So these are the product businesses. Product businesses are tough because there's so much money to acquire a customer, and then essentially you have to try to keep that customer, right? That's why most product businesses fail. That's why a lot of people think of product businesses as low margin, and generally they need a lot of funding to get started because product businesses are about your brand, right? So once you get that brand, it can get very, very, very lucrative, right? Product businesses go like this, right? Like this. Okay, so it can go like, you start out slow, and then typically after like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years, you've built a brand, and it's just like, that's when it gets crazy. Most don't even last that long, or if they do, they just continue to be like hobby businesses. Usually when people go full-time into that kind of business, 90% are done after a year, and it just kind of cuts in half after that. And then 4 or 5 years in, there's that 1% that have like built a brand, and they're able to get like a recurring customer base, right? In that kind of business, I would recommend focusing on a niche, because if you're going to go general, general is fine, but if you can go general and try to do everything in an already difficult business, it's going to be really, really, really tough, and you're going to need to raise a lot of money, and you're going to put yourself through a lot of headaches. And it could work. There's just some executional challenges. Anything is possible. Anything can be executed, right? It's just there's going to be some executional challenges if you go too general into like a product business. So you got service businesses. Service businesses are great in the sense that you can get cash flow immediately. You can pretty much self-fund or grow organically, however you want to put it, pretty like deep into your business. A lot of service businesses never actually raise money, right? And service businesses can kind of, they can kind of range pretty drastically. Now, when we think of service businesses, there's kind of two subdivisions within that. There's kind of low skill services and higher skill services, right? So lower skill services are something that maybe doesn't require as much specialized knowledge for, the barriers to entry are smaller. Higher skill services, have, more barriers to entry, more specialized knowledge, like maybe very specialized consulting or something like that. Now there's advantages to both as an entrepreneur, right? So the lower skill business is something that's more simple, very general labor, lots of different categories within that. That can be very scalable, right? So service businesses generally don't tend to be as scalable as product businesses and the tech category over here. But the service businesses, the great thing about them, especially the low skill businesses, so they're scalable and I don't want to say low skill because I don't want to diminish, but let's say less specialized. Okay, I'm going to say less specialized. I don't want to diminish kind of like the work that goes into some of these, different, trades and whatnot because, it's very specialized. I could not do it. It's just a little bit lower barrier to entry than something that's like heavy knowledge-based consulting or something of that nature. Maybe something that's like, engineering or something like that. So lower skill labor, less specialized labor is a very, 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 very scalable. And the great thing about it, not as scalable as the other two, but very scalable, and it can be scaled relatively quickly, much quicker and with much less money than these two categories, the tech side and the product business, right? So the less specialized services can definitely scale. And the great thing about them, is that highly skilled entrepreneurs, they tend to overlook these categories. They don't look at these lower skilled labor categories, and they think they have to do what that specific role is in order to grow that kind of business, which is absolutely not true in many different cases. So you don't have to actually do the role in order to be able to grow that kind of business, right? And so the great thing about these businesses is they don't cost that much money to start. Most of your competition is not that entrepreneurial. Almost all your competition does not understand anything to do with digital marketing, right? They don't know what search engine optimization is. They don't know what Google Ads is. They don't know what social media marketing is. They might have heard these things, but they don't actually know what these things are, right? So this is actually a very overlooked category. It's a category that I don't want to just skip over because so many people are talking about the product businesses and the tech businesses and the high end the consulting businesses, but these very general labor businesses, they're localized, so you can't you don't have these big competitors coming in being able to beat you quickly like you might have in these two in the product space or in the tech space. So this for starter entrepreneurs, this is a great way as a first business to get some cash flow, to free yourself up from the job. It might take a year or two, but you can make $50, $100, $200,000 in profit relatively quickly with these kinds of businesses. Okay, anything to do with the more general labor pool. It could have some specialization to it, but not something that you might have to go to school for many years or be in an industry for many years, right? So the next thing is specialized, services, right? So think of your consulting and that kind of stuff. So that's great because you can actually make a lot of money per hour, right? It's cash flow positive from the beginning. Usually it just requires your time. You have a team's time. The challenge with these ones is it is way harder to scale. These consulting, high-end specialized services, they're great for having a very nice upper middle class, maybe even lower wealthy lifestyle. You can make a lot of money. You can make $250,000 after many years. You can make even more than that. Maybe if you work for like a big company, you're kind of like a partner within that. But it's never gonna be it's never gonna feel passive in any way, and it's not gonna be super scalable. And why is that? So one, the reason it's not gonna feel super passive is because you are the service that you're selling. Even if you're selling a team, they're going to defer to you when they have high level questions, right? So you are always going to be involved in that, and a lot of people in those businesses love what they're doing. They could talk about what they're doing all day. It's an absolute pleasure to be doing what they're doing, and so that that's great. It's super fulfilling. I used to be actually in professional services, and I worked with people who had gone to that level. And they were much older than me at the time. Even now, they're much older than me, and they were super successful, and they love it, and they were fulfilled in every way, and that's great. But that's not gonna, their little kind of branch was never gonna scale like globally or anything like that. And then the other part is more just recruiting people, right? So it's very hard to recruit for specialized services, right? Like it's very hard because not a lot of people have those specialized skills, and then usually when they do, those types of people like to bounce around a lot in the workforce. It's tough. Like it's really tough to that's what makes it not as scalable. Actually, it's just because not only is your time not that scalable, but other people's time that are very well versed in whatever you're doing is just not that easy to find, right? Whereas in this category, kind of like the lower specialization part of the service spectrum, it's much easier to find because there's more general labor available in these kind of different aspects of the general labor pool. Finally, we get to like the tech space. So the tech space, we can kind of categorize as like software. Hardware is more of like a product, even though it's tech, so we'll kind of think of that as like the product space. I don't want to get into like software hardware combos because that is like most people watching this right now, it's just not relevant to them. That's like it's very niche, very like difficult execution. But there's, let's say, general software as well as e-learning and courses and that kind of stuff. So general software is going to be one of the most scalable things you can do. It's one of the most profitable things you can do. But obviously the barriers to entry are high. You need to have a lot of skills, usually tech skills. You don't have to have tech skills. You could find someone to be your CTO, but again, that's recruiting, people that are very good, and then it's just a lot. It's a grind, and you're not going to make any money for a very long time, several years before you start to make real money, and your probability is low. Although probability is it's relative. Like if you have a great idea and you're a great executor, you could. It's the best entrepreneurs in the world. They're continuously successful because they're just good. So it's not even a probability thing. It's a skill thing. It's like, oh well, if you told LeBron James like, what's your probability of making the NBA? I mean, he was like 12. Well, it's a lot higher than other people's because he just had a bunch of things going for him, genetically, and also, it's just what the guy's born to do. Clearly, so someone. Who's like got the skills and is just built for it, yeah, they can do it. But that's going to be very difficult to scale a tech company, especially now when people are more hesitant to get funding. Like in the early 2010s, late 2000s, like VCs were just throwing the money around. Everyone wants to be the next like Facebook or whatever, and it's still possible and it's still going to happen for a lot of people. And if this is what you do and this is what you're passionate about, you should 100% pursue it because it's a super great industry. It's always going to be around. I don't want to say always because so many industries that were always around. This industry, the software industry, has completely changed, and those industries are no longer around. So I don't want to say always, especially when talking about software. But if you can actually execute on software and the great thing is there's so many niches, and on top of that there's so many industries that are still living in the past. So like you have industries obviously like fintech that are really like forward. That's financial services technology for those of you who don't know. And then there's businesses that are like super, super old school still, like construction, real estate, that kind of stuff. And there's like tons of opportunities for people interested in like the software space to take advantage of those industries. And some of the most old school industries, or industries you don't even think of, they are some of the most high margin industries too. They will pay a lot of money for good software. So there's tons of opportunities in the software space, and it scales. So even though you have to raise some money, maybe you have to give some equity up, all that kind of stuff, your software can scale. And even if it is not built for like something, it's not built for everyone in the world to use, like like an iPhone or something like that. Even if you get like a niche industry on what you're doing, it can be very, very lucrative. You can be a billionaire or like a very successful multi-millionaire. So lots of potential there. It's just going to take many years. Executional risk is high, although again, it just depends more on your skill than a probability, because probability is relative to your skills and whatnot. So the final category is like the e-learning knowledge space. This is a category that's growing a lot. Lots of people want to learn. Lots of people are on YouTube. Lots of people are on different channels trying to learn. This is cool because you set something up once and you can make continuous recurring revenue from it, which I absolutely love, right? So this course space is really cool. We all have really specific knowledge to do with it, and we can always kind of like teach people that knowledge, and it's definitely very scalable. Okay, so on one end you have like products which are not so recurring in nature. The courses can be it's very subscription based. They can be heavily monetized and that kind of stuff. Software, the same thing, can be heavily subscription based, recurring in nature, and then the services are relatively recurring in nature as well, right? So everything you want to do, you want to kind of try to make it as recurring as possible, and then think about all the different factors when you start something, because depending on the business you're in, your lifestyle, your trajectory, what you do on a day-to-day basis, and then also the recurring nature of your clients is going to look very different depending on which category you decide to focus on. So hopefully that gives you something to think about. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. We'll be more than happy to answer them.